Are you also tired of one-size-fits-all weight loss plans? Meet Noom, the personalized solution that meets you where you are. Noom is able to understand your unique needs, from dietary restrictions to medical concerns. Unlike restrictive programs, Noom embraces your lifestyle and choices. Discover a sustainable approach to weight loss, tailored just for you. Honestly, Noom felt like it was made for me. It's not just about what I eat, it's about understanding why. With Noom, I've learned so much about myself and built healthier habits that stick. It's all about progress, not perfection. Say goodbye to restrictive diets and experience the Noom app for yourself with personalized lessons and expert coaching. Noom's psychology and biology-based approach has helped over 5.2 million people achieve their goals. Stay focused on what's important to you with Noom's psychology and biology-based approach. Sign up for your trial today at Noom.com. That's Noom.com. And check out Noom's first ever cookbook, The Noom Kitchen, for 100 healthy and delicious recipes to promote better living. Available to buy now wherever books are sold. Ever tried reading while jogging, cooking, or even juggling flaming torches? Yeah, it doesn't end well. But with audiobooks.com, you can conquer books without the circus act. Dive into over 450,000 titles, including more than 10,000 free ones. Get hooked on a bestseller, find your next obsession, or finally read that classic you've been avoiding since high school. And here's the inside scoop. Sign up today for a free 30-day trial and snag your first 3 audiobooks on the house. Sign up for your free trial at audiobooks.com/podcastfree today. That's audiobooks.com/podcastfree.
Welcome to All About Agatha, the podcast dedicated to reading and ranking every single mystery novel written by the Queen of Crime, Dame Agatha Christie. I am Kemper Donovan, and in this episode, I sat down with the author, Colleen Mulaney, of a new book titled Agatha Whiskey, 50 Cocktails to Celebrate the Best-Selling Novelist of All Time. I stumbled into a little bit of a mini-series here, a 2-episode mini-series on food and drink as it relates to Agatha Christie. In my last episode with author Karen Pierce, we went through a list of the top 10 Christie titles in regards to food. And on this episode with Colleen, I will be going through a list of the top 10 Christie titles as they relate to alcohol. So get excited for that. I should also note that today is the birthday of Agatha Christie. It is September 15th. Agatha Christie was born 133 years ago on September 15th, 1890. And I am currently in England celebrating this fact by way of my participation in the Agatha Christie Conference and the International Agatha Christie Festival. So happy birthday, Dame Agatha. This conversation you're about to listen to was recorded a few days before that, and it was a ton of fun. Let's get into it. My guest today is Colleen Mulaney, who is a lifestyle expert and best-selling author of how-to books covering a range of topics, from entertaining to cocktails to floral design and weddings. She is a former magazine editor-in-chief and has been a regular contributor to Huffington Post, Today.com, New York Daily News, Woman's Day, and many other outlets. Her most recent book before the one that we will be discussing today was called Jane Austen, 50 Cocktails to Celebrate the Novels of Jane Austen. That is definitely a title I can get behind. I know many of you will feel similarly. That book won the International Gourmand Drink Culture Award. And the reason that Colleen and I are talking today is that she has a new book out in just a few days' time. It comes out on the 19th of September, and it is titled Agatha Whiskey, 50 Cocktails to Celebrate the Best-Selling Novelist of All Time. I was honored to write the foreword to this book, and I can't wait to get down to the business of discussing Dame Agatha and booze. Welcome, Colleen.
Thanks, Kemper. Thank you so much for having me. I'm such a big fan of your podcast, and thank you so much for writing your gracious foreword for the book, and congratulations on your new book, The Busybody.
Oh, well, bless you, Colleen. You've already started with a plug for my book. So this is just started off fabulously.
As authors, right? Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. So one of the things I just want to get out of the way from the start, lest it become the elephant on the Zoom, so to speak. And I know many of you out there will be thinking this as well. We have to deal with the fact that Agatha Christie herself was quite famously a teetotaler. She didn't really like alcohol. And one of the things I love most about your book is that you deal head on with this issue, Colleen. So could you just talk a little bit about how you structured your book and specifically how you dealt with Christie's personal abstention from cocktails?
Oh, sure. I wanted to celebrate the fact that she wasn't a drinker. So I included a mocktail with each cocktail recipe. And I also featured a mocktail that I titled Mocktails and Murder. Although I know Agatha, as we all know, would much prefer a glass of cream to a cocktail. I just thought she would really enjoy this mocktail looking out to her gardens, which she loved. The recipe is very garden-centric. It has Seedlip Grove 42 in there, which is a English company, and they distill non-alcoholic spirits. And they're all derived from herbs and, citrus. So I thought it was a perfect non-alcoholic spirit to ground this mocktail. And then I just added some rhubarb syrup and some bitters. But I also thought that it was important to include mocktails in the book for the growing number of people that are abstaining from alcohol, either for personal reasons or just to pursue a healthier lifestyle.
I really love that this book is for people who love their alcohol, but it's also for people who don't love their alcohol and who might want to enjoy non-alcoholic beverages, which, I know from personal experience, half the time when I go to a restaurant now, I end up ordering the mocktails because they often taste better, or at least you might not get a surprise from the taste in the same way that sometimes you do with the more alcoholic ones, where you kind of need to know what you're doing, I think, to order properly. There's just a whole world of mocktails out there. And I love that you tapped into that for this book. And it just feels really appropriate for Agatha Christie.
Oh, it does. And mocktails have come such a long way. Bars across the globe are really embracing mocktails. Oftentimes there's a separate mocktail menu. The bartenders really get on board with inventive syrups and bitters. And it's, the flavors are just really outstanding. Some really fun garnishes to add to it. So mocktails are taking over the world.
Given that the subtitle of your book is 50 Cocktails to celebrate the best-selling novelist of all time, and we all know that Agatha Christie wrote 66 full-length mystery novels, is there a pairing for each cocktail to its specific title of Christie's, or how exactly is the book structured?
It was a painful process to figure it out. So I broke it up into areas that I thought maybe would work. Part one is the bar basics, the glassware, the syrups. I have a lot of syrups in the book because I think syrups are so important for building a cocktail and a mocktail. And then techniques. And then I have a section on drinking detectives. I have murders and mysteries in faraway places because, she took us everywhere. I have garden parties, stolen identities, and unscrupulous vicars. I have trains, planes, and murders on the go. And then family dynamics and deadly disturbances, because there was a lot of family drama in her writing. Mm-hmm. And then I have a little section on the mousetrap, because you have to include the mousetrap.
Of course. No, I love that. It's really almost a thematic classification here in the book. And that's really interesting because it's a book about Agatha Christie, but it really is also a book that teaches the reader a lot about how to craft a cocktail. And I appreciated that because I actually don't know that much about making cocktails and what mixes well and what your building blocks are for making these drinks. And I learned a lot while also reading about Agatha Christie. So what could be more perfect than that? I really enjoyed the heck out of this book. I am curious, you can tell that you're a fan of Agatha Christie. How did you first become acquainted with Agatha Christie? What is your Agatha Christie origin story?
So my origin story is that I grew up hooked on Nancy Drew books when I was younger. I just, remember getting them for my birthdays and holidays. And I think I read all of them. So I think Agatha was just a natural progression. The Mysterious Affair at Styles, The Third Girl. I found that novel to be so retro. It just reminded me of To Serve with Love, which is one of my favorite movies to this day. Who doesn't love the Orient Express? I loved how Agatha described the exquisite interior, the lush fabrics, the deep, rich colors, the overall glamour of the train. her level of detail in her writing, it just brought me on board. And I think that's what really drew me into Agatha. She was just, as I grew, so did my sophistication in reading. And so Agatha was really my next step.
Yeah, I think that's such a common origin story, actually, that, people who love to read become avid readers through Christie. And I love that you're emphasizing her ability to set the scene. I completely agree. I think it's something that she doesn't get enough credit for. She's absolutely a master at that. And she does it often so efficiently with just a couple of words or a few sentences. It's so effortlessly done that I think it's easy to overlook. I appreciate that you're emphasizing that. I'm also interested that you mentioned Third Girl, because in my last episode, which is all about Agatha Christie and food, I didn't really even necessarily mean for it to happen this way, but your book and Karen Pierce's book at Recipes, inspired by Agatha Christie, are just happening to come out at around the same time. So I always like to schedule the release of these episodes around the time of the book releases to be helpful. And I think it's funny because Karen also mentioned Third Girl. It's not one of the most celebrated Christies. It's not one of my most favorite Christies, but there's clearly a lot of love for it. And it's one that has brought people into the Christie fold. So just a little shout out there for Third Girl, I suppose.
Yes, love it.
All right. Well, speaking of my last episode on Christie and food, in that episode, we did a little top 10 of Christie novels as they relate to food. And it was so much fun that I figured we had to do the same thing here as to Christie and alcohol. So here goes. We are going to run through our top 10 Agatha Christie novels as they relate to alcohol, starting with number 10 and ending at number 1. This is going to be very different top 10 from the All About Agatha general rankings, and that is the fun of this exercise. I do want to note this is going to be a very spoiler-heavy conversation. It's really hard to talk about the use of alcohol in many of these novels and to not spoil very key aspects of the murders that take place in these novels. So if you are worried about spoilers, just note each title as we run through them and fast forward a couple of minutes, or do whatever it is that you do when you're worried about spoilers in these episodes. Just want to point that out up top. And now we will begin with our 10th title, which actually just so happens to be the 10th title in the generalized All About Agatha rankings. That would be, oh yes, Peril at End House, which is just a generally boozy novel. I think that the booziness of the inhabitants of End House, the guests who are staying there, these debauched former bright young things, goes a long way toward filling out who they are and how they operate. And I would just even love to use Peril at End House as an opportunity to shout out how Christie does often employ booze-soaked revelry to set a scene, even if it doesn't figure centrally into her mystery plot, or even if it does. I'm thinking in particular about the paired Tommy and Tuppence short stories, Finessing the King and The Gentleman Dressed in Newspaper, which are in the Partners in Crime collection. I'm also thinking about The Affair at the Victory Ball, which is the very first Poirot short story to be published. And I think that it's worth shouting out the much quieter, much more staid, but no less significant booziness of one Miss Jane Marple, who is all about the homemade liquor. She is constantly offering it to guests or administering it to those who may have received a shock, say if they discovered a dead body. She simply wouldn't be Miss Marple without her damson gin and her cherry brandy, her homemade liqueurs. So yeah, I was curious what your thoughts were, Colleen, as to this melange of titles that I have basically just mentioned in my grab bag of a number 10 slot here.
Oh my gosh, I love them all. I love how Peril at End House just starts out with dry martinis. And along the way, we have chocolates laced with cocaine.
Of course we do, yeah.
And then we have lots of cocaine and watches. I love how she just immediately sets the scene, right, with the martinis. And I love how in Tommy and Tuppence, Agatha just has them drowning their sorrows and frustrations in cocktails from not solving their last case. Mm-hmm. So they sit and just moan about it. And then all of a sudden, in finessing the king, they attend a masked ball where Tuppence thought it would be a great idea if they get up and get out of their cocktail haze, dress up, go to a masked ball. And there are coated cocktails there. And then, of course, a woman is stabbed. And then they get right back into the thick of things. So it was a great idea.
Alcohol can energize also, right? Exactly. Like it gives them some pep.
Right. Motivates you to get to the ball, to see the woman that's stabbed. Yeah. Anyway, but then in the affair at Victory Ball, like Poirot, he's enjoying a creme de banane. How do you say that word? Creme de banane.
Creme de banane. I mean,
creme de banane.
As listeners will know, I am not the authority here on French pronunciation. This is where my dearly missed podcast co-host, Catherine Brobeck, who is no longer with us, she was a comparative lit major, and she was fluent in French and would make fun of me mercilessly for my terrible French accent. So I feel that I cannot even provide any advice. So we'll just have to muddle through it together and wish that Catherine were here with us.
Yes. Okay. At any rate, he ordered, one of these cocktails, which is so odd at a ball to order a creme de banane. He drank infrequently, but he enjoyed a glass of good wine. And he always had to say, if it's, good wine.
Mm-hmm.
As we know, his go-to libations were herbal tea, blackberry currant syrup mixed with water, his sirop de cassis. And then his favorite was hot cocoa.
It's really true. Poirot was not a booze hound. He drank very, very sparingly. And you get the sense it had to be of the finest wine for him to drink. And then the creme de menthe, or, the occasional cocktail. But he really does stick to his syrups and his melted chocolates, doesn't he?
Yes. Third girl, hot cocoa. And then you have Miss Marple, right? So here she is making her own cherry brandy from her grandmother's recipe. And she offers it to, as you said, like everyone who might have had a bit of a shock, claiming it calms the nerves. She was a great, instead of handing out tea, she'd be like, well, just have some sherry. Have some cherry brandy. It's good for you. And so in the book, I have a recipe, Miss Marple's Cherry Blossom, cherry brandy and gin and a little bit of sake and some grenadine and lemon juice. So
did you say a little bit of sake?
Yes. I just thought maybe Miss Marple would want us to mix it up a little bit. So
absolutely. No, you know what? I mean, Miss Marple is so, we were talking about this with the food when she goes on holiday in A Caribbean Mystery. I mean, she is all about sampling different things. She has a curious nature. I have no doubt in my mind that if you told Miss Marple, here's this new, alcohol you haven't tasted, sake, would you like some? She'd be like, yes, please.
That's right. Why not? And it's actually the cover cocktail. So she made the cover, Miss Marple. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, it's so funny that between Miss Marple and Monsieur Poirot, we know who the booze hound is. And it would be Miss Jane Marple. So yes. I don't want to say booze hound, but the alcohol aficionado, because it really does come up a lot. And, it's actually the reason why on the podcast, whenever we would cover a Miss Marple short story, we called it a Miss Marple nightcap. Because it just felt like she was all about, these little homemade liqueurs, and it was more appropriate than a cup of tea or something like that. When you really look at the texts, there's a lot of alcohol at her place in St. Mary Mead. So I really, really love that. All right. Well, let's move on to number 9 here in our top 10 Agatha Christie novels as they relate to alcohol. This is an odd choice, but bear with me here. It's Death on the Nile. And Death on the Nile is an odd choice because alcohol is not really celebrated in this book. And perhaps that makes sense since Christie herself didn't have a taste for it. But we have a character in this novel who herself is a novelist. She is a romance novelist. Oh, yes, that would be Salome Otterborn, who is a minor yet standout character in the novel. And Salome is an alcoholic. And in the book, we can see what harm this addiction causes her daughter, Rosalie. But I would argue that the textual character has been overshadowed by Angela Lansbury's absolutely brilliant comedic performance of Salome Otterborn in the 1978 Peter Ustinov, Death on the Nile. It is one of the best performances of a drunk person on film ever, I would argue. And I actually don't even mind that performance has overshadowed the textual Salome Otterborn. I do think Olivia Hussey, she portrays Rosalie in that film, and her character does retain something of the pain and frustration that Rosalie feels in the book. I would say that in honor of Salome and Rosalie and the portrayal of the dangers of alcohol and alcoholism in this book, that this might be a perfect opportunity to offer up a mocktail recipe.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with you there. I mean, there isn't really much alcohol besides the usual champagne and wine.
Sure.
But Angela Lansbury is wonderful in her performance when she speaks to Poirot about his progress, how his progress is going, and calls him porridge.
Well, and how are you getting along with your investigation of this tragic affair, Monsieur Porridge?
I was watching it several times thinking, are you sure? Is that what she said? She said porridge. And then when she was ordering a drink, she calls it a golden crocodile and then orders another, telling the barman,
"Here, barman. This crocodile has lost its croc."
She was just classic. You do see the pain, the embarrassment, and maybe the protection of the daughter protecting the alcoholic mom. So another great reason to have mocktails in the book for those abstaining. So I have a great mocktail with Seedlip Garden 108, fresh lime juice, and a little bit of basic simple syrup, which is just the sugar water mixture, and then a little lime twist for a garnish. And it's quite delicious and refreshing. And so I think that's a perfect mocktail for Death on the Nile.
That sounds lovely. All right, let's move on to our 8th selection here. That would be a Caribbean mystery. I already referenced it because this book did come up on our previous food episode. There's much mention of Planter's Punch in this novel. And given that Miss Marple and everyone else are on holiday here, I think alcohol very much helps set the scene. What do you think, Colleen?
No, I do. Yes. I love that Miss Marple gets treated by her nephew, Raymond West, to normally to everything, right? Little hotel stays, and especially this tropical vacation at the Golden Palms Hotel. And it's her only foreign case. So she gets there. Everything's great. Major Palgrave is chatting with her. And then the next morning he's found dead. So her work begins. And then another character escapes death by not drinking the poisonous wine. So, I was thinking, boy, what a hangover that would have been.
Indeed.
But I love the tropical scene. You can smell the tropical flowers. You can just feel the palm trees swaying. It's like you're there. I just love that. And I love the hour right before sunset, which I call the golden hour. So I called this cocktail in the book the golden hour. And it's rum, lots of rum. I use Montauk Rum Runner's coconut rum because then you have, the rum and the coconut. It's the double layer of flavors there. A little pineapple juice, orange juice, lime juice. And then, of course, you have a dark rum for a floater, if desired. And then for garnish, pineapple wedges and orange slices. So there we have a very festive rum-soaked cocktail for our Caribbean murder.
That sounds delicious. As someone who definitely went way too hard on the Malibu and Coke in my early 20s, that was one of my earliest go-to drinks where I was like, oh, yummy. It's, coconutty flavor in Coke. And then after 2 to 3 years of that, I was just like, I am never drinking Malibu again. And just
right.
the whole tropical kind of subset of drinks, I was just like, I don't know if I can do this again. But I think it's time maybe to rediscover the pleasures of rum and those kinds of tropical tasting drinks.
Oh, I definitely think so. And, I really study the spirits brands that I use and I taste test with. And I love Montauk Rum Runner's coconut rum because it's not too sweet and it's really made with, natural ingredients. And so there's not a lot of sugar in there, or excess sugar, I should say. As we get older, our tastes change, our palate changes. And so I always look for ingredients, am I going to like this? Am I going to like this in 5 minutes, when I've digested it? So, and does it have the layers of flavors for me? Right. So right. I wanted to keep on saying something to me, the cocktail. So I think this one does it.
Lovely. Yeah, I find not to mention the hangover from alcohol, but the older I get, the more I can even get a hangover just from sugar, right? If you eat, or if you sort of consume something that's too sugary or just like too intensely sugary, it can almost have a similar effect. And I know that can happen if you're not careful with cocktails sometimes, because there can be so many sugary ingredients. So I feel like that's something that you're probably constantly guarding against or have an eye on, which is why you need to make sure that your ingredients are as sort of simple and pure as possible, I would suppose. Does that make sense? I don't know. I'm asking you because as I said, I know so little.
Yes, no, absolutely. And it's funny because a cocktail is built. It's, built on layers, right? You have a spirit, you have a citrus, you have a mixer. And so, a murder mystery is built, right? You have your characters, you have your murder weapons, you have your alibis. So it's kind of like they're kind of tandem, right? A cocktail with a murder.
I love it. Yes, the pieces of the puzzle and the pieces of the cocktail. Yes. Absolutely.
Right.
There's an analogy to be
drawn. What glass should I use? What murder weapon should I use? Right. Yes.
That's great. All right, let's move on to number 7 here in our list. This would be Passenger to Frankfurt. I'll bet there are some of you out there who didn't think we would be mentioning this title, and yet an open container of beer is the catalyst for all the tomfoolery that follows in this late Christie thriller. I'm not a huge fan of Passenger to Frankfurt. Sir Stafford Nye, who is our protagonist in that book, he willingly drinks a drugged up beer so that he can allow a woman we'll eventually come to know as Countess Zerkowski to impersonate him on a plane. She seriously slips something into his beer, which makes him sleep through his boarding call and tells him so. And he just goes ahead and drinks it, even though he's met her, approximately 2 minutes before all this happens. And yeah, so I would say that beer is actually, in a weird way, somewhat central to this novel.
It is. And it's, of course he wakes up having missed his flight, but this is the hook here. Somehow he gets home without his passport. So right. That was some beer. So I didn't do a beer cocktail here because I have a beer cocktail in another novel that I feature that I think we're featured. Yes, we have it in our list.
Oh yes, but, we have another beer centric novel coming up. I can't wait.
Yes, we do. So this one I called The French 75 to Frankfurt because I thought it can go anywhere and it's discreet enough to go undercover and hide in plain sight. And also because Sir Stafford was invited to a fancy dinner where there were French dignitaries and English diplomats. So I just focused on something, light and celebratory for the book's cocktail. It's funny because this was Agatha's 80th book, published in tandem on her 80th birthday. Or with her 80th birthday. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, maybe we should call it a French 80 to Frankfurt.
Exactly. Right. Yes. We can call it whatever we want.
French 75 is actually one of my favorite drinks. I mean, it's champagne and gin. Is that right?
So it's cognac.
Oh, there's cognac.
A little bit of basic simple syrup, some lemon juice, and champagne.
Oh, interesting. I love that. Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds like it would be light, but also take you places. It's not fooling around either.
Right. I mean, in a web of international espionage, you need a good cocktail.
All right. So that's Passenger to Frankfurt. Let's move on to number 6, which is Sleeping Murder, the last Agatha Christie book to be published, though not written. Here in Sleeping Murder, we have a poisoned brandy bottle that almost kills Mrs. Cocker, the poor cook at Hillside in Dilmouth, in the south of England. And this brandy bottle would have killed Gwenda and Giles Reed if they had poured a drink out from it, but they hadn't yet. So they got lucky there. And I'm thinking maybe we can pair this with some sort of a brandy-based cocktail, Colleen?
Yes, that's exactly what I have in the book. It's called Seaside Sangria for Sleeping Murder. I just love how Gwenda, she just comes off her honeymoon and she just buys this huge old house on a hill on the coast of England because it spoke to her, because it just felt like home to her. And I thought, how impulsive. But then we soon find out why it feels like home to her. That was so interesting and intriguing without giving up too much. So
let's stop there.
Seaside Sangria because there's brandy in sangria, but I also chose it because it's such a seaside, warm weather batch cocktail. Again, Agatha has this magic and she like takes us to this house that Gwenda's renovating. Oh, and maybe like it's made with Miss Marple's cherry brandy.
I mean, why not? Does sangria always have brandy in it? I always think of sangria as just being chilled wine, either red or white, and then with like fruit added to it. But is this just like a special kind of sangria?
No, it usually has a brandy in there. Yeah.
It has a brandy like added as well, but it does have wine in it too, right? Or am I crazy?
Right.
Okay.
Right. So my seaside sangria has a bottle of red wine. And then I throw in a little bit of cranberry liqueur because I just, again, it's another layer of fruity flavor. It adds some depth to it. And then brandy, yes. I have 4 ounces of brandy and then some lemonade and orange juice. And then the fruit for garnish, right? The orange wheels, you can do fresh strawberries. You can just do whatever fruits you want. Apples, another, popular one to throw in sangria. And then some sparkling water on top.
I mean, in that it is a drink then that has red wine and brandy in it. It's almost like the perfect combination of Poirot and Marple all in one glass.
It really is. Yes.
Sangria. Who knew that sangria would be the drink, like the ultimate Agatha Christie drink?
Yes.
I would not have predicted that before we started this conversation.
There's so many revelations coming from this conversation. It's just, yeah.
Right. No, I mean, sangria is another one of my favorites. So as I'm sure it is for many people. I mean, it's hard to resist a good sangria, I think. Okay, well, let's move on to number 5. Now, number 5 is a little bit of a cheat because this is not a novel. It's a novella, but it's a really boozy one. So I had to include it. This would be Triangle at Rhodes. And Triangle at Rhodes is another one of Christie's holiday stories. She would actually revise it and pad it out into, it's actually not fair to say that she padded it out. She completely reworked it in a brilliant way and turned it into Evil Under the Sun, the full-length novel Evil Under the Sun, which is also a wonderful novel. But Triangle at Rhodes involves a ton of booze. And in this case, the murder vehicle is one of the cocktails that's mentioned. It's a pink gin. Specifically, Commander Chantry orders one for himself, and then his wife Valentine orders the same. So he just gives his own pink gin to her. Alas, that pink gin is poisoned and she dies soon thereafter. So I think we're going to have to pair this one with a pink gin, aren't we?
Yes, absolutely. The pink gin cocktail is basically bitters swirled with ice, and then you add your gin, and then you strain it into a coupe glass and you garnish with lemon peel. So that's, your basic pink gin. So in Agatha whiskey, I have a great pink gin cocktail under the name Disappearing Act. And so I had to mention, of course, when Agatha disappeared on a cold December night in 1926. So this cocktail is a perfect pink gin cocktail. So that's why I'm slotting it in here. It is 4 ounces of Wolfer gin, and Wolfer is a vineyard out on Long Island, and they have a pink gin that is floral forward, and it's absolutely delicious. So I use it in this cocktail, and I pair it with some peach nectar, some nectarine liqueur, some lemon juice, and then I top it with Prosecco. And you can put it in a coupe glass, just a larger coupe glass.
There's no way that isn't delicious. I mean, that
it is just outstanding. Yes. So this is my vote for a pink gin cocktail any day.
Got it. I'm sold. All right, let's move on now to our 4th selection. And here is our other beer-centered novel. That, of course, would be All About Agatha's number 1 ranked novel in the general rankings, Five Little Pigs, which features a more proper use of beer in a murder mystery than in Passenger to Frankfurt, since beer is the murder vehicle in this novel.
Yes.
Here we have Ammius, I drink it all down in one draft, Crail, sucking down a cold beer, and noting when he does so that everything tastes foul today, which is one of Christie's all-time greatest textual clues because it's so obvious, but only once you've had it explained to you at the end, when you get to the end of the novel, that of course what this means is that something else he drank earlier in the day must also have tasted off. That earlier drink was yet another warmer beer, which carried the dose of poison that ended up killing him. So what do we have here in terms of a beer-anchored drink, Colleen?
So I featured this in the book, and I call it the Artist in Residence. And it is a perfect beer cocktail. So again, it's layered. I have a little bourbon, some ginger liqueur, some lemon juice, honey syrup, and you top it off with 6 ounces of Belgian-style wheat beer. And
Mais bien sûr.
That's your layered cocktail. Yes.
Got to be Belgian beer and not French beer. Just make sure it's not French beer.
Right. Yeah.
This isn't the first beer-based cocktail ever to exist, but they're certainly not common occurrences. I think it's a little bit more of a specialized thing. And that too, I think, is in keeping with this book, which is kind of a Christie fanatics book. Those in the know that this book is one of the crown jewels, along with a lot of the more obvious ones, like And Then There Were None, and Murder on the Orient Express, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, etc. So yeah, this drink just feels so appropriate for this one. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Listeners, I am in England at the moment, and there is little in life that is more stressful than traveling. If the jet lag isn't keeping me up at night, then all the logistics and other assorted anxiety of being away from home certainly is. I'll bet that you too have had those nights where your brain is racing and you just want it to stop. And you know what? It turns out one great way to make those racing thoughts go away is to talk them through. Therapy is an excellent means of doing that, allowing you to move past your negative thought cycles and find some mental and emotional peace. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Therapy is not just for those who have experienced major trauma, though if you have, it is there for you too. It is there for all of us, and if you've been thinking about giving it a try, I suggest you use BetterHelp, especially since I have such a nice little promotion for all you listeners today. So get a break from your thoughts with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/Agatha today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Agatha. Let's move on to our third title. We are in our top 3 Agatha Christie novels.
We're getting boozier.
Yep, as they relate to alcohol. And oh boy, we really are getting boozier with number 3, The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side. There is an argument to be made that this should be ranked first or second, actually, because the party at which our central victim dies in this book is a total booze fest. And one of the cocktails that is served at this party is the means by which the central murder happens. We have poor starstruck Heather Badcock, who is poisoned by way of a daiquiri handed to her by her movie star idol, Marina Gregg. But of course, Marina says she's already had 3 daiquiris herself when she hands it to her, because Heather is like, oh no, I couldn't possibly. And Marina's like, oh, trust me, I've had a bunch. There aren't just daiquiris at this party at Gossington Hall, however. One of the other attendees, of course, is the former owner of Gossington, Dolly Bantry. And I love this exchange here. When a minor character named Mrs. Alcock, not to be confused with Heather Badcock, when Mrs. Alcock is having trouble with what seems to be straight vodka on the rocks, it's not completely clear, but that seems to be what she's drinking. Mrs. Bantry advises her, vodka ought really to be thrown straight down the throat. And Mrs. Alcock looks startled when Dolly says this. And then Dolly continues, but that needs practice. Put it down on the table and get yourself a martini from that tray the butler's carrying. I love that Dolly Bantry's advice for a person whose drink is too strong for them is to go for a martini. There's so much booze flowing at this party. I love it.
Isn't it great? Yeah. This is like one of my favorites because it's as soon as you get to the party, it's like, it's like everything's just exploding and it's just fun. So this is really like a classic daiquiri drink. And so you have a little light rum, fresh lime juice, and simple syrup. And now a daiquiri, that's a classic daiquiri, right? So you can really add things and kind of twist it however you want. You can add a little maraschino liqueur, you can add banana liqueur, and you can even add some dark rum for like a winter or a fall version of a daiquiri.
Oh, right. Yeah, because daiquiri does, I think, have a bit of a summery or like warm weather feel to it, right? No, question actually for you, Colleen. Is a classic daiquiri always blended? Because I always think of a daiquiri as, having the consistency of a slushie from 7-Eleven.
No, that's a great question. No. So no, that's a frozen daiquiri. So this is a classic daiquiri where you build these ingredients over ice and you shake and then you strain into a glass. And so that's a classic daiquiri. And then a frozen daiquiri is you take these ingredients and you add some, ice and strawberries or frozen strawberries.
Right.
And you mix it in a blender. Right. And then you get the frozen.
So it's basically the same thing as like the difference between a classic margarita and a frozen margarita. Same kind of a thing. Like you can add ice and other stuff if you want to, and then turn it into the slushy version. But the classic version is always going to be liquid on ice.
Liquid strained. It's straight up the classic daiquiri.
Oh, it's straight up. There's not any ice.
No.
That is a revelation. I'm shocked.
You shake it with lots of ice, so it gets really cold.
Okay, it is cold. It is at least cold. Okay.
Yes.
You're blowing my mind here. I'm learning a lot.
You have to drink them fast like Marina.
Right. Exactly. No, and it makes a lot more sense actually that it would be a classic liquid drink like that rather than the frozen variety. But I definitely, there's no way that when I was reading The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side for the first time, and probably even for the podcast not that long ago, that I wasn't imagining a frozen daiquiri, actually.
Well, yeah, most people do. So, yeah. Right. But no, the classic is just shaken and strained.
Got it. Okay. All right. The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side. Really, really a favorite as to alcohol of mine. It's one of the ones where I think it's just that scene. I mean, she does have party scenes, obviously, and we're actually about to get to another really great boozy party scene with our selection for number 2, but she doesn't do it too often. And I think the scene there in The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side is just a standout, as is the opening scene in 3-Act Tragedy, or a very early scene in 3-Act Tragedy. So this is our number 2 selection here. In this book, we have not just one, but 2 poisonings via alcohol. The first is by way of a very excellent dry martini. Those are Poirot's words. That martini is drunk by pretty much everyone in the room, but unfortunately, one of those martinis is poisoned, and it is the hapless Reverend Babington who is the one who drinks that poisoned martini, and he dies soon thereafter. And then our second murder involves a glass of port that is served by the butler Ellis to Sir Bartholomew Strange at a dinner party, and Sir Bartholomew Strange dies shortly thereafter. This novel actually also features a sherry party hosted by Monsieur Poirot himself, for good measure. So there's just a lot of alcohol flowing in 3-Act Tragedy.
There certainly is. I love these martini-soaked dinner parties. It's just, they're classic, right? And it's so funny because, researching Agatha's work, I was thinking, I know she was trained an apothecary with poisons. I'm not sure, about the cocktail aspect. How can I blend that in? And then all of a sudden, you have all of these martinis and daiquiris and everybody's just like, falling on the ground. I'm like, oh, this is going to be fun. But yeah, so this is a perfect martini cocktail. So we have a little vodka, 1.5 ounces of vodka, a little bit of dry vermouth, and a lemon peel. And you build it in a bar glass, you add ice, shake, and strain into a martini glass.
Shaken, not stirred?
Yes, I shake. Yeah. You can stir, you can lightly stir, but I tend to be a shaker, Kemper. I tend to be a shaker.
Well, it's so funny because I feel like martinis, there are 2 big bifurcations among martini drinkers. One is, do you shake or do you stir? And then does it have vodka in it or does it have gin? Because I know there are some people that will not abide vodka in a martini, and vice versa with gin. Do you have strong feelings about that?
Oh, I absolutely. I prefer gin. But, I think most prefer vodka, although I don't know, Kemper, maybe we need to put out a little voting on the gin or
do a little
vodka.
poll.
Do a poll. Yes.
I have a feeling it might be regional too. I am basing this on nothing, but for some reason, I feel like vodka is pretty popular here in the US. I wonder if like a gin martini might be a little bit more common, maybe in the UK, for example. I don't know. I've learned on this podcast that I should not speak about cultural differences unless I really, really know what I'm talking about, because I usually get it wrong. But
yeah. I agree with you on that point. I do. Absolutely. I think gin would just blow the US away. Yeah. In the martini department. Absolutely. Yeah. I think we would be vodka and the UK would be gin.
Would tend to be gin. Yeah. Yeah. And these are all tendencies, obviously. I mean, it's obviously very possible to get a gin martini here in the US and to get a vodka martini in the UK. But yeah, that's interesting. All right. Well, it is time for our top ranked Christie novel in regards to alcohol. And some of you may have been able to predict what the top book is, because it's right there in the title. Oh, yes. It is time to crown our winner, Sparkling Cyanide, our gold standard when it comes to Christie and cocktails, or should I say our champagne standard. We have 2 poisonings by way of champagne in this book. And of course, the drink itself is in the title. I mean, whenever I think of the book Sparkling Cyanide, I immediately see champagne. I see the bubbles coming up from the bottom of the glass in the champagne flute and that golden, that lovely golden champagne color. And that novel too, and I'll say this, you were just referencing in 3-Act Tragedy how Christie obviously used poisons a lot in her books. And it's true, but I think it's actually quite remarkable that for as many times as she used poisons, which often have to be ingested via a liquid, that she didn't actually use the poison in alcohol or poison in cocktail motif that many times. She certainly could have used it more than she did. And I like that, because I think that the few times that she chose to use it, it packs a lot of oomph. She didn't, she didn't beat it to death whatsoever for as many times as she used poison. But this is, of course, a book where she really did use it, and she did it twice. And the book, I think, is notable given that it has that dinner party kind of setting within London, and they're in this sort of theatrical space, and it feels just a bit slinkier and boozier and almost, I don't mean this in an insulting way, but almost has a little bit of like a tawdry feel to it, a sort of slinky, tawdry feel to it. It's just all really boozy. And I think, let's not make this complicated. We obviously have to talk champagne and some champagne-based cocktails.
We do. I just find George, this grieving widow, recreating that fateful dinner party, complete with the champagne toast. It just blows my mind. I'm like, I almost want to jump into the book and say, George, I don't know if that's a good idea. Let's just let's take a minute. You know what I mean? But champagne is just the way to go. But as a murder weapon, I just think it's like tragic, right? Champagne as a murder weapon? No, it's tragic. But in Agatha Whiskey, I have Sparkling Cyanide, and I have a great champagne cocktail that I mix with elderflower liqueur and some gin. And you have to have rosemary simple syrup for rosemary.
Of course, yes.
Yes. And I have all the simple syrup recipes in the front of the book. And then champagne to top. And rosemary sprigs for garnish, because we can't forget our dear rosemary.
Rosemary for remembrance. I mean, this shows, that you really did go back into the text, because when you read Sparkling Cyanide, she says it over and over again, rosemary for remembrance. I remember by the time I got to the end of the book, I was like, I get it. Rosemary for remembrance. So yeah, you need two different rosemary elements there in the drink. That is totally appropriate. And that too sounds absolutely delicious. Well, that completes our top 10 of Christie novels, but I find myself curious as to whether your favorite Christie novel is in that top 10, Colleen, because I imagine that you might have a different answer when it comes to your favorite book in regards to alcohol or in regards to the cocktails that you created versus just your favorite Christie book as a general reader and lover of mysteries.
So I have to say The Crooked House is my favorite. I think because I love the setting, the old estate, the outbuildings, the treehouse where it all happens, sitting rooms. It's also old world, and the characters are just amazing and full ranged. You have the wild young widowed wife and the crazy sister-in-law and the family company and the financial dramas. And then you have this young love that's revisited, over tragedy. And then you have the very, very unexpected ending. So I would have liked to have had a different ending, but you can't have everything. But I just think that it's such a big part of Agatha's magic that she takes us to these destinations and settings. I can just hear the crunch of the long drive as the car comes up, and I just can smell the oak trees. And I like to live what I read. And so that's why Crooked House is my favorite. But, it's with any of her novels, really.
I can definitely get behind that. Crooked House is one of our top ranked novels, and it's such a masterfully executed novel in all aspects of how one can create a novel. So, and then as regards Christie and cocktails, do you have a favorite book that makes use of cocktails or that sort of inspired you, in unexpected ways when you were writing Agatha Whiskey? I'm just curious if there was one book in particular, and if not, that's fine, because you obviously, engaged with nearly all of them, but I'm curious if there was one that sort of surprised you when you were delving deeper into the booziness of these books.
So it's funny. So I did a Orient Espresso Martini, and I thought that was really interesting and fun, and propping it, I printed out a ticket, and that was really fun for me to connect that way to the book. And with Crooked House, my cocktail in the book that I featured is called A View from the Treehouse. So, and it's very garden centric. It has English garden peas and lemon juice and tarragon simple syrup and dry vermouth and vodka. And so again, like very layered. It's kind of like that story. There's just so many pieces and so many layers. And just when you think, and just when you think that, you've tasted the drinks, the lemon will pop up, and it's just like the ending pops up and it's like, whoa, what just happened?
Okay. I like that. Props to you on a fantastic pun. The Orient Espresso Martini. I assume, does that have, it has a bit of like coffee espresso flavoring in there, I assume?
Yeah. So it has vodka, Kahlua, espresso, and then just a dash of basic simple syrup. And I garnish with a star anise instead of espresso beans. I mean, you can definitely put them, but I like the spiciness of the star anise.
Well, you got to keep on your toes on that Orient Express because there's a lot going on there. So, a little pick me up is in order, I think.
Lock your compartment at all times.
Well, I can't let you go without asking you the age-old question that I force almost everyone on this podcast to answer. And that would be, if you had to choose, who would you choose, Poirot or Marple? I think I actually know the answer to this, but please let us all know.
Okay, so let me just say this is such a hard, torturous question. So,
of course it is.
But it's like with Poirot, I root for him, personally, that he'll let his walls come down, and you see it in some novels. But I think Miss Marple for me, because she's got this great community, and she's a virtuous person. She trains girls from the orphanage as housekeepers so they can go on and make a living. And she's really up for anything. And she makes brandy. So I'm kind of done here, Kemper.
Got to be Miss Marple, right?
Gotta be Miss Marple.
I mean, I can make this the TLDR on your answer is cherry brandy and damson gin beats Syrah de Cassis. So
Yeah, right. Although I do admire him for his hot cocoa fetish.
Well, this has been an absolute pleasure, Colleen. And I'm actually going to be including a link in the notes to this episode that everyone can click on to order a copy of Colleen's book if you would so desire. We are, of course, heading on into the holiday season. And I think this book would make a great stocking stuffer. It might be a little big for a stocking stuffer, but just a great gift for the Christie lover in your life, which could very well just be yourself. And I certainly enjoyed it and learned a lot, especially about the art of making cocktails and the craft of cocktail making. So it was really a delight to first read it and to write the foreword to it as well, and to speak with you today. Thank you so much for coming on.
Kemper, thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It was such a joy to write this book. And I learned so much as well in all of my research. And just in closing, cocktails are for entertaining and they're for sharing. So grab a book and grab some friends, mix up a batch, and just have some fun.
Fantastic way to end. Thanks, Colleen. Thank you again to Colleen Mulaney. As you could tell, she is extremely knowledgeable about cocktails and the art of crafting cocktails and mocktails. So there really is a lot to be learned in her book. It was very obvious to me as I went through it that she put a lot of time and care into relating these cocktails to the works of Agatha Christie. So I think many of you will enjoy it. And I hope you enjoyed our conversation. For my next episode, I will be bringing you my live episode at the International Agatha Christie Festival. I finally figured it out. No more mumblecore, echo-tastic recording like last year. I promise that you will be able to make out exactly what I and my fabulous co-panelists are saying. You will not want to miss that episode. I'm so excited to be able to bring it to you. If you're looking for more content, you can head on over to the podcast's Patreon page, www.patreon.com/allaboutagatha, and I have provided a link in the notes to this episode. For September, I reviewed the original Agatha Christie play, The Lie, very early play of Agatha Christie's, and there was a fantastic radio play adaptation of this stage play that aired on BBC Radio 4 in 2020. And there's actually an upload of that radio performance on YouTube that's available for anyone to listen to. So I listened to it and then provided a review on Patreon. That is the sort of content that is available to you on the Patreon site. You can email me at allaboutthedame@gmail.com. And you can find the podcast on Twitter at allaboutthedame and on Instagram at allaboutagatha. And you can also find me on Facebook. My Facebook author page is Kemper Donovan Books. And I encourage all of you to pre-order my debut mystery novel, The Busybody, which will be out in January of 2024. I've also provided a link for that very purpose in the show notes to this episode. And as always, I encourage you to leave a rating and or a review wherever you are listening to this podcast. And I'll see you next time. Bye.
Ever tried reading while jogging, cooking, or even juggling flaming torches? Yeah, it doesn't end well. But with audiobooks.com, you can conquer books without the circus act. Dive into over 450,000 titles, including more than 10,000 free ones. Get hooked on a bestseller, find your next obsession, or finally read that classic you've been avoiding since high school. And here's the inside scoop. Sign up today for a free 30-day trial and snag your first 3 audiobooks on the house. Sign up for your free trial at audiobooks.com/podcastfree today. That's audiobooks.com/podcastfree.